At 70 years old, I thought I had already survived every kind of heartbreak a mother could endure. I had buried my husband. I had worked double shifts until my hands cramped at night. I had skipped meals so my son could have new school shoes. I had smiled through loneliness, exhaustion, and grief because that is what mothers from my generation were taught to do: endure quietly. My name is Evelyn Hart, and for most of my life, I believed family was sacred. I believed if you gave your children enough love, enough sacrifice, enough loyalty, one day they would look back and remember everything you did for them. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, my own son looked me in the eyes at my granddaughter's wedding and said the words that changed my life forever. "You're not on the list, Mom." Not privately, not gently, not with shame. He said it at the entrance of the wedding venue in front of nearly 200 guests. People stared. Some whispered. Others looked away because watching an old woman get humiliated by her own child made them uncomfortable. But nobody defended me. Not my son, not my daughter-in-law, not even my granddaughter. And the worst part? I was the one who paid for the wedding. Every flower, every chandelier, every violin player, every glass of champagne they proudly served to guests while I stood outside like a stranger. But before I tell you what happened at that wedding entrance and why my son decided his own mother no longer belonged there, you need to understand who I was before that day. Because I was not weak. I was not helpless. And I was certainly not the foolish old woman they thought they could erase. I was born in Savannah, Georgia, in a tiny apartment above a grocery store my father managed for 40 years. We were not rich, not even close, but we had dignity. My mother used to tell me something I never forgot. Money can disappear overnight, Evelyn, but character follows you to the grave. I carried those words with me my entire life. At 21, I met Thomas Hart. He was tall, serious, hardworking, and had the kindest eyes I had ever seen. He worked as a truck mechanic and smelled permanently of engine oil and tobacco. To some women, that may not sound romantic. To me, it smelled like safety. We married young, too young, according to my mother. But Thomas and I built a life together from absolutely nothing. Our first apartment had peeling wallpaper and a leaking sink. During winter, cold air slipped through the windows so badly we used towels to block the drafts. But we laughed through those years. We dreamed together. And when our son Daniel was born, Thomas held him like he was holding the future itself. For a while, life was beautiful. Then came the accident. I still remember the police officer standing at my door 23 years ago. I remember the look in his eyes before he even spoke. That look people get when they know they're about to destroy someone's world. Thomas died instantly when a drunk driver crossed into his lane on the interstate. One moment, I was a wife. Next, I was a widow with an 9-year-old son staring at me in confusion because he still didn't understand what death really meant. I did not have time to collapse. Bills still came. Rent still needed to be paid. Children still needed food. So I worked. I worked harder than I thought a human being could work. During the day, I sewed dresses and repaired clothing at a tailoring shop downtown. At night, I took alteration jobs home and stitched until my eyes blurred from exhaustion. I hemmed prom dresses. I repaired wedding gowns. I stitched tuxedos for wealthy men who never even looked at my face when they handed me their clothes. And every dollar I earned went toward Daniel: his education, his books, his future. I told myself it was worth it because one day he would understand. And for a long time, I thought he did. Daniel was smart, very smart. He graduated near the top of his class, earned scholarships, then eventually entered the world of finance, where people wore expensive watches and shook hands over drinks that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I was proud of him. God help me, I was so proud. I still remember crying in the bathroom during his college graduation because Thomas wasn't there to see it. I remember whispering, "We did it, Tom. Our boy made it." But success changed Daniel slowly, not all at once. At first, it was little things, correcting the way I pronounced certain words when his college friends visited, asking me not to talk too much at dinners because I might overshare, buying me clothes he said were more appropriate for upscale restaurants. Then he married Paula. Paula was beautiful in the polished kind of way magazine women are beautiful. Perfect hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile that never quite reached your eyes. The first time she visited my apartment, I watched her glance around at the old furniture and faded curtains. She smiled politely and said, "This place is so cozy." I knew what she really meant. Small, old, embarrassing. But I ignored it because Danielle loved her. Or at least I thought he did. When Clara was born 2 years later, I believed maybe things would soften, and for a while they did. That little girl became the brightest part of my life. I babysat while Daniel and Paula traveled. I attended dance recitals. I baked birthday cakes. I helped with homework. I sat beside Clara during thunderstorms because she was terrified of lightning. And every time she hugged me and called me Grandma Evie, my heart melted. I truly believed love was enough to hold a family together. I did not realize that something dangerous had already started growing inside my son: shame. The more successful Daniel became, the more uncomfortable he seemed around the life he came from, around me. He moved into wealthier neighborhoods, started attending charity galas, joined private clubs, surrounded himself with people who talked about investment portfolios over wine tastings. And slowly, I became someone he tolerated instead of someone he cherished. Still, when Clara got engaged last year, I thought maybe this wedding would bring us all back together. I was wrong about that too. 6 months before the wedding, Daniel and Paula began visiting my apartment almost every weekend. At first, I thought it was sweet. They'd sit at my kitchen table drinking coffee while discussing wedding plans. Paula showed me flower arrangements. Daniel talked about venues. Clara sent me pictures of dresses she liked. And every single conversation ended the same way. "Well, everything is just so expensive." I should have noticed it then. The careful pauses, the rehearsed sighs, the way Paula would glance at Daniel before mentioning another cost. But I loved my granddaughter, and love makes fools of good people. One evening, Daniel finally said it directly. "Mom, we're struggling to cover everything." He looked embarrassed while saying it. Or at least I thought he did. "This wedding means a lot to Clara," Paula added softly. "We just want her to have something beautiful." I remember looking around my apartment that night after they left. At the old couch, the faded family photographs, Thomas's picture hanging beside the kitchen clock. Then I opened the cabinet where I kept my savings. Money Thomas and I had spent decades building. Money meant for emergencies, for old age, for security. And I made the decision that would eventually lead to my humiliation. I decided family mattered more than money. So I paid. I paid for the venue, the catering, the floral arrangements, the musicians, the wedding planner, even the imported champagne Pauline's insisted guests would expect. In total, I spent nearly $90,000. Not because they forced me, because I loved them, because I believed one day they would remember my kindness with gratitude. I had no idea they were already planning to erase me from the celebration I was funding. And on the morning of Clara's wedding, while I stood in front of my mirror putting on my pair of earrings and smoothing my blue dress, I still believed I was getting ready for one of the happiest days of my life. I had no idea I was dressing for my own humiliation. The morning of Clara's wedding began like a dream. Sunlight poured through my bedroom curtains in soft, golden streaks, while classical music played quietly from the little radio near me vanity mirror. For the first time in years, I felt excited about getting dressed. Not because I wanted to impress anyone. At 71, you stop caring about impressing people, but because this day mattered. My granddaughter was getting married, and despite everything that had changed between me and Daniel over the years, I still believed family moments like this could heal old wounds. I stood in front of my closet for nearly 20 minutes staring at dresses. Most of them looked too plain, too dark, too ordinary. Then I saw the navy blue silk dress hanging carefully inside its garment bag. I had bought it 3 years earlier after seeing it in a boutique window downtown. At the time, I couldn't justify spending so much money on myself, but the saleswoman had smiled and said, "Every elegant woman deserves one unforgettable dress." I almost laughed remembering that now. Back then, I bought it without knowing when I would wear it. Turns out, I had been saving it for the exact moment my heart would break. I slipped the dress on carefully and looked at myself in the mirror. The silk hugged my shoulders beautifully. The color made me silver curls look softer, more graceful. For a moment, I didn't see an old widow staring back at me. I saw the woman Thomas used to look at with admiration. I reached for me pearl necklace next. Not expensive pearls, not celebrity pearls, but the necklace Thomas gave me on our 20th anniversary. He had saved money for months to buy it. "I know it's small," he told me that night, nervous as a young man again. "But when I saw them, they reminded me of you. Simple, elegant, impossible to forget." My fingers trembled slightly as I fastened them around my neck. God, I missed him. I sat down slowly in my vanity and applied my makeup carefully. A little powder, soft lipstick, mascara, nothing dramatic. I wanted to look dignified, warm, beautiful, in the way women my age rarely allow themselves to feel anymore. When I finished, I sprayed the French perfume I reserved only for important occasions. The scent instantly brought back memories: anniversaries, Christmas dinners, family photographs, dance nights with Thomas in the kitchen after Daniel fell asleep. For a few precious moments, I felt genuinely happy. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Paula. "Please arrive on time. The valet entrance gets crowded after 4. No heart emoji, no excitement, no warmth, just instructions. Still, I ignored the coldness. I told myself weddings were stressful. I grabbed my purse, checked the envelope containing Clara's wedding gift, and took one last look around my apartment before leaving. The apartment suddenly felt very quiet, almost like it was trying to warn me. Outside, the afternoon air was warm and beautiful. The cab driver who picked me up smiled when he saw me. "Well, don't you look elegant today?" he said cheerfully. I laughed softly. "My granddaughter's getting married. Big day then." The biggest. During the drive, I watched the city pass by through the window, all my heart filled with anticipation. I kept imagining Clara walking down the aisle. I imagined her smile, her tears, the music. I imagined hugging her afterward and whispering how proud her grandfather would have been. I even imagined Daniel finally softening toward me again. Maybe tonight would remind him where he came from. Maybe seeing family gathered together would bring back the son I once knew. Hope is a dangerous thing, especially for mothers. When the cab finally pulled up to Green Willow Estate, my breath caught in my throat. The place looked magical. White roses lined the entrance pathway. Crystal chandeliers glowed beneath enormous silk tents. String lights wrapped around anciento oak trees like stars trapped in branches. Luxury cars filled the valet lane. Guests in expensive suits and designer dresses drifted through the entrance, laughing softly. Everything looked breathtaking, and every single detail had been paid for by me. The valet opened my door carefully. "Enjoy the wedding, ma'am." I smiled proudly as I stepped out. For a brief moment, I felt important. Not because of the money, but because I believed I had helped create happiness for someone I loved. Guests greeted me warmly while I walked toward the entrance. "Evelyn, you look stunning. Congratulations on your granddaughter. The wedding is incredible." I thanked them politely while searching for Daniel and Paul Lane near the main reception arch. Then I saw them. Daniel stood near the entrance, greeting guests in a black tuxedo worth more than my first car. Paula stood beside him in a fitted emerald gown, sparkling beneath the lights. They looked wealthy, polished, perfect, like people from magazines. I smiled immediately and started toward them. My son noticed me approaching, and something strange happened. His smile disappeared. Not faded, disappeared. His entire body stiffened. At first, I thought maybe he was emotional. Maybe seeing his mother dressed up reminded him of his father. But then I noticed Paula lean toward him quickly. She whispered something into his ear while glancing directly at me. And both of their expressions changed. Cold. Paula folded her arms tightly. Daniel's jaw clenched. Still, I kept walking, still smiling. "Daniel," I said warmly, "everything looks beautiful." I leaned forward slightly to hug him. He stepped backward, not subtly, deliberately. The movement stunned me so badly it froze mid-step. People nearby noticed immediately. The air around us changed. "What are you doing here?" Daniel asked. His voice was low, sharp. I blinked in confusion. "What?" "You heard me." I laughed nervously. "Daniel, sweetheart, what kind of question is that?" His eyes moved around nervously toward the nearby guests watching us. Then he said the sentence that split my life into before and after. "You're not on the guest list, Mom." For a second, I genuinely thought I misunderstood him. The music around us continued playing softly, while conversations nearby faded into muffled noise. I stared at my son, waiting for him to smile, waiting for the joke, but no smile came. Instead, Paula stepped closer beside him. "We had to make some difficult decisions about seating," she said coolly. "The venue has limited capacity." Limited capacity. I almost laughed. I had personally approved the venue expansion invoice 2 months earlier. I paid for the additional guest accommodations myself. "Daniel," I whispered carefully, "I don't understand." His face hardened further. "You weren't invited." The words landed like a slap. Nearby conversations stopped completely now. People were staring openly. A woman near the entrance covered her mouth awkwardly. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." My cheeks burned instantly. I looked around, desperately hoping someone would say this was a misunderstanding. Nobody did. Not even Clara. Because at that exact moment, my granddaughter appeared near the entrance in her wedding gown, surrounded by bridesmaids. She saw me, and instead of looking shocked, she looked uncomfortable, like my presence itself had become embarrassing. That realization hurt more than anything Daniel had said. "Clara," I breathed. She hesitated, then slowly walked toward us. "Grandma," her voice sounded weak, guilty. I grabbed her hands instinctively. "Sweetheart, what is happening?" She glanced nervously toward her parents before answering. "We just thought, May, it would be easier this way." Easier. That single word shattered something inside me. Not anger, not yet. Something deeper. Dignity. Because suddenly I understood. This was not confusion, not a mistake, not wedding stress. This was planned. They had discussed this, agreed on this, prepared for this, and still accepted every dollar I gave them. I looked at Daniel again. At least tell me why. His face darkened immediately. Mom, look around. I frowned. What does that mean? He exhaled impatiently, like I was forcing him to explain something obvious. These people are important: business partners, investors, clients. This event has a certain image. And there it was, the truth. I embarrassed him. Not because of anything I had done, because I was old, because I came from a simpler life, because I reminded him he had not been born wealthy. Paula finally said what Daniel was too cowardly to say directly. We didn't want people asking questions. Questions about me, the woman who sacrificed her entire life for him. My stomach twisted violently. Around us, nearly 200 guests watched in total silence. Nobody intervened. Nobody defended me. I suddenly felt exposed, ancient, humiliated, like someone had ripped away my clothes in public. And then Daniel delivered the final blow. I think it's best if you leave quietly. Quietly, as if I was the one causing a scene. I stared at my son for several long seconds, and in that moment I realized something terrifying. I no longer recognized the man standing in front of me. The little boy I raised was gone. In his place stood a stranger wearing my son's face. For several seconds, nobody moved. The wedding music continued softly behind us, while nearly 200 guests stood frozen around the entrance, pretending not to stare. But they were staring, every single one of them, at me, at the old woman being rejected by her own son at the door of the wedding she helped pay for. I could physically feel the humiliation spreading through my body like heat. My chest tightened, my throat burned, even my hands felt numb. Still, I refused to cry. Not there. Not in front of Paula. Not in front of those wealthy strangers. And certainly not in front of Daniel. I looked at Clara again, my granddaughter, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during thunderstorms, now stood in a wedding gown worth nearly $12,000, paid for with my savings, and could not even see my eyes. Clara, I said softly, you knew about this? Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. That silence told me everything. Daniel stepped between us immediately. Mom, please don't do this here. I blinked slowly. Dow what? Cause a scene. Cause a scene. I almost laughed at the cruelty of it. They publicly humiliated me in front of hundreds of people, yet somehow I was the problem for reacting to it. Paula crossed her arms tighter across her chest. We're trying to handle this respectfully, she said. Respectfully. The word hit me so hard I finally understood something important. People like Paula used politines the same way other people used knives. Everything sounded clean while it cut you apart. I looked around again. The guests had gone completely silent now. A few people whispered behind champagne glasses. Others avoided eye contact entirely. And then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. Several of Daniel's business associates were watching me with pity. Not compassion, pity, like I was some confused elderly woman who had wandered into the wrong event. God, the shame of that nearly broke me. I had spent my entire life working with dignity, sacrificing quietly, giving everything I had to my family. And now my own son had reduced me to an embarrassment standing outside a ballroom. I swallowed hard. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Daniel, are you ashamed of me? The silence afterward felt endless. His eyes flickered briefly, just briefly, but that tiny hesitation told me the truth before he even spoke. Mom, this isn't about shame. Then what is it about? He exhaled heavily, glancing around at the watching guests again. It's complicated. No, I said quietly. It's actually very simple. My voice no longer trembled. In fact, something strange was happening inside me. The pain was still there, the humiliation too. But underneath both of them, another feeling had started rising. Clarity, sharp, cold, painfully clear. I finally understood what my son valued most: appearance, status, image. And suddenly, memories from the past several years started connecting in my mind, like pieces of a puzzle I had been too loving to solve earlier. The way Daniel stopped inviting me to business dinners, the way Paula corrected how I dressed before events, the way they slowly moved me farther from photographs during holidays. The way Daniel once joked that my apartment looked depressing compared to his clients' homes. I had ignored all of it because mothers are experts at forgiving their children before apologies are even offered. But standing there beneath those wedding lights, I realized forgiveness without respect becomes permission, and I had been giving permission for years. Paula stepped closer again, lowering her voice like she was speaking to a child. Evelyn, it would really be best if you just left quietly before this becomes uncomfortable for everyone. Uncomfortable. I stared at her carefully. Then I looked down at her emerald bracelet. I recognized it immediately because I had bought it for her birthday 2 years earlier. The same woman now asking me to disappear wore gifts purchased with my love. Something inside me hardened, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like door locking. I turned toward Daniel last time. You let me spend nearly $90,000 on this wedding. His jaw tightened instantly. Mom. No, I interrupted calmly. You let me pay for this venue. The flowers, the catering, the music, the honeymoon suite, the photographer. I looked directly into his eyes, and after taking all of it, you decided I didn't belong here. His face darkened immediately. This isn't the time. You're right, I said softly. The time for honesty should have happened before you accepted my money. A few guests shifted awkwardly nearby. Good. Let them hear it. Let them feel even one fraction of the humiliation they forced onto me. Clara suddenly stepped forward, her eyes glossy with panic. Grandma, please. That word almost shattered me. Grandma. Not Evelyn, not Mom. Grandma. The same title she used when she wanted comfort as a child. I looked at her wedding dress. I remembered sitting beside her during fittings, adjusting the hem myself because the boutique tailor had done it poorly. I remembered her hugging me after choosing the gown. You always make everything better, Grandma. And now she stood silent while I was thrown away. Did you know? I asked her again quietly. Tears filled her eyes immediately. I didn't think they'd actually stop you. That sentence landed harder than anything else, because it means she knew. Maybe not fully, maybe not cruelly, but enough. Enough to stay silent. Enough to let it happen. Daniel immediately stepped forward again. That's enough. His voice carried authority now. Cold, sharp. The same tone wealthy men use with employees they consider disposable. I suddenly realized something horrifying. My son no longer spoke to me like family. He spoke to me like a problem, a public relations problem. I looked at him for a very long moment. Then I smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, just enough to confuse him. All right, I said softly. Everyone froze as slightly. Even Paula looked uncertain now. I straightened my pearl necklace carefully. If my presence embarrasses you so deeply, I continued calmly, then I won't ruin your perfect evening. Relief instantly flashed across Daniel's face. Relief, not guilt, not sadness. Relief that the old woman was cooperating. That expression changed everything inside me forever. I picked up my purses slowly. Then I looked directly at Clara. I hope one day you understand what really happened here tonight. Her lips trembled violently. Grandma. But I was already turning away. And as I walked back through the grand entrance I had paid for, something strange happened. The crowd slowly parted from me. No one touched me. No one stopped me. No one defended me. But several people lowered their eyes in shame, because deep down, they all knew what they had just witnessed. Not family conflict, cowardice. I walked beneath the white roses I paid for, past the orchestra I funded, past the candles and crystal chandeliers purchased with money I spent after decades of hard work. Every beautiful detail around me carried pieces of my sacrifice, and yet I was leaving alone. By the time I reached the valet area, my vision had blurred slightly, not from weakness, from disbelief. The taxi driver from earlier was still waiting nearby. When he saw my face, his expression changed immediately. Ma'am, are you okay? For a second, I almost lied. Then something inside me cracked just enough for honesty. No, I whispered. I don't think I am. He quickly opened the car door for me. I slid into the back seat while distant wedding music echoed through the night air behind me. The driver looked at me carefully through the mirror. Where to? I stared out the window at the glowing ballroom one last time. At the celebration I built. At the family I sacrificed everything for. At the son who had just erased me from his world. Then I answered quietly, take me home. And as the car pulled away from the wedding venue, I had no idea my son had just made the biggest mistake of his entire life. The ride home felt longer than usual. Charleston's evening lights blurred outside the taxi window, while silence filled the car like heavy fog. I sat perfectly still in the back seat with my purse resting on my lap and my hands folded tightly together, because if I relaxed even slightly, I knew I would start shaking. The humiliation kept replaying in my mind over and over again. You're not on the list, Mom. Not invited, not wanted, not welcome. Every word Daniel said felt carved into my chest. The taxi driver glanced at me several times through the mirror, clearly worried. Finally, he spoke carefully. Ma'am, do you need me to wait while you get inside? I looked at him in confusion. Then I realized tears were silently running down my face. God, I hadn't even noticed. I quickly wiped them away and forced a small smile. No, thank you. He hesitated before nodding. Well, whoever hurt you tonight is going to regret it someday. At the time, neither of us knew just how true that statement would become. When I stepped inside my apartment, the silence hit me immediately. No music, no laughter, no champagne glasses clinking, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the kitchen wall. I closed the door behind me slowly and leaned against it. For a moment, I felt 71 years old for the first time in my life. Not physically, spiritually, exhausted, discarded, invisible. I walked to the mirror near the hallway and stared at myself. The elegant makeup I had applied so carefully that afternoon was slightly smeared now. My pearl necklaces suddenly looked foolish. The navy silk dress no longer made me feel beautiful. It made me feel naive. I removed the pearls slowly and placed them on the kitchen counter. Then I sat down at the dining table and finally allowed myself to cry. Not delicate tears, real grief. The kind that comes from betrayal so deep it changes the shape of your heart forever. I cried for Thomas. I cried for the years I sacrificed. I cried for the boy Daniel used to be. And I cried because somewhere deep inside me, I already knew something terrible. My son had never truly seen me as a person, only as a resource, a provider, a helper, a wallet. And the moment my presence treated his image, he erased me. After nearly an hour, my tears finally stopped. The apartment became quiet again. I stood slowly and walked into my bedroom to change clothes. That was when I saw it, the cream colored wedding folder resting on the dresser. For several seconds, I simply stared at it. Inside that folder was every receipt, every invoice, every wire transfer, every contract. Proof. Proof that the beautiful wedding still happening across town existed because of me. Slowly, I walked toward the dresser and picked it up. My hands no longer trembled. Something inside me had changed during that drive home. The pain was still there, but now another emotion stood beside it. Awareness. Cold, sharp, clear. I carried the folder back to the dining table and opened it carefully. The first document was the venue contract. Green Willow Estate, signed by Evelyn Hart. The second was the catering invoice, paid in full from my account. Then the floral arrangements, the orchestra, the honeymoon suite, the wedding planner, the photographer, $90,000. Nearly all the savings Thomas and I spent decades building together. I sat there staring at the numbers while something terrifying slowly dawned on me. They had no intention of respecting me from the beginning, because no loving son takes his mother's life savings while secretly planning to exclude her from the event she funded. This was not impulsive cruelty, it was calculated. The realization hardened something deep inside me. Suddenly, memories from the past few years started flooding back differently. Every little insult I excused, every moment I ignored. Every time Paula treated me like outdated furniture. Every time Daniel spoke to me with embarrassment hidden behind politeness. I had mistaken tolerance for love. And now I was finally seeing the truth. My phone suddenly vibrated against the table. Daniel. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then I answered. His voice sounded irritated immediately. Mom, where are you? I almost laughed. Not, are you okay? Not, I'm sorry. Just, where are you? At home, I answered calmly. He exhaled sharply. You left without saying anything. I closed my eyes briefly. You told me to leave. That's not what I meant. Oh? I said softly. Then explain what you meant when you told your mother she wasn't on the guest list. Silence. In the background, I could hear music and laughter from the reception I paid for. Finally, Daniel lowered his voice. Mom, we'll talk about this later. No, I said quietly. We'll talk about it now. Another pause. Then his tone hardened slightly. You embarrassed us tonight. The sentence stunned me so deeply I almost stopped breathing. Embarrassed them? Not the son publicly humiliating his mother. The mother existed publicly. I leaned back slowly in my chair. You know something, Daniel? What? For years, I blamed myself for the distance between us. I thought maybe I talked too much. Maybe I dressed too simply. Maybe I didn't fit into your new world. I looked down at the folder in front of me. But night, you finally showed me the truth. What truth? That you're ashamed of where you came from. His silence confirmed everything. I continued softly. You're ashamed your mother worked with sewing needles instead of stock portfolios. You're ashamed your father fixed trucks instead of owning companies. You're ashamed your success was built by people with rough hands. Mom. No, I interrupted calmly. You don't get to interrupt me tonight. That surprised him into silence immediately. For the first time in years, I was no longer speaking like a mother begging for affection. I was speaking like a woman who finally understood her own value. I gave you everything I had, I said quietly. And tonight you treated me like something embarrassing that needed to be hidden. His voice lowered again. You're overreacting. That sentence changed everything because suddenly I stopped feeling emotional entirely. The crying stopped, the grief cooled, even the humiliation began transforming into something else. Resolve. I looked again at the stack of contracts in front of me. Then I asked one simple question. Daniel, whose name is on the venue contract? Silence. Long silence. Finally, Mom, don't start this. Too late. It had already started. I stood slowly from the table and carried the folder into my office. Inside the bottom drawer sat another folder. Blue leather. Thomas's estate records. Property deeds, business investments, bank documents. Things Daniel barely knew existed. Because after Thomas died, I quietly managed everything myself. And unlike what my son believed, I was not helpless, not even close. I opened the blue folder carefully. Then I smiled for the first time all night. Not because I was happy, because I finally realized something important. Daniel thought he had power because he had money, but he forgot where that money came from. And for the first time since standing outside that wedding entrance, I no longer felt humiliated. I felt dangerous. I barely slept that night. Not because I was crying anymore. That part was over. The woman who came home humiliated from her granddaughter's wedding no longer existed by morning. Something inside me had shifted permanently. For years, I had allowed myself to become smaller so other people could feel bigger, softer so they could feel powerful, invisible so they could shine. But humiliation has a strange effect on people. Sometimes it destroys them, and sometimes it wakes them up. At exactly 8:30 the next morning, I called Martin. He answered immediately. Evelyn, I need you to come over. His voice is sharpened instantly. What happened? I remembered who I am. There was silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, I'll be there in 30 minutes. While waiting for him, I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork. Not emotional paperwork, power paperwork. Property deeds, investment portfolios, bank statements, business contracts, tax records. The deeper I dug through Thomas's old files, the more horrifying the truth became. Daniel and Paula had absolutely no idea how much of their lives depended on me. Not partially, completely. At 9:05 sharp, Martin arrived carrying his leather briefcase. The moment he stepped inside and saw the mountain of documents spread across my table, his eyebrows lifted. Good Lord. I gestured toward the chair across from me. Sit down. He removed his coat slowly and looked around the apartment carefully. You seem different today, he said cautiously. I smiled faintly. I am. For the next hour, Martin reviewed every document in complete silence. The townhouse deed, the beach property ownership, the trust accounts, the stock investments, the rental warehouse contracts Thomas and I bought years ago after selling the trucking company. Finally, Martin removed his glasses and leaned back heavily. Evelyn, what? Your son thinks you're a retired seamstress living off savings. I know. He stared at me in disbelief. You own nearly $8 million in assets. I took a sip of coffee calmly. Closer to 9 now. Martin blinked several times. You never told Daniel? No. Why not? I looked down at my coffee cup. Because I wanted to know whether my family loved me or my money. The room fell quiet. Then I laughed softly. Turns out I got my answer at a wedding entrance. Martin nodded slowly. For the first time since arriving, anger appeared in his eyes. What they did to you was disgusting. Yes, I replied calmly. It was. He flipped through more papers carefully. The townhouse Daniel and Paula live in is fully under your name. No shared ownership, no inheritance transfer, no legal claim. Correct. And these warehouse properties, inaudited, still generating monthly income. Martin looked stunned again. Evelyn, these rental contracts alone bring in over $60,000 every month. I smiled faintly. Daniel thinks I'm just an old woman living off retirement checks. The irony suddenly became almost amusing. My son spent years feeling embarrassed by my simple apartment while secretly living off wealth I built quietly in the background. Martin closed the final folder slowly. What exactly do you want to do? That question sat heavily between us. For a moment, the old version of me almost answered. The mother, the forgiving woman, the part of me still grieving the son I thought I raised. But then I remembered standing outside Green Willow Estate while strangers stared at me with pity, and suddenly my hesitation disappeared. I want them to feel the consequences. Martin remained silent. I'm not talking about revenge, I continued calmly. I'm talking about reality. I stood and walked toward the window. Daniel and Paula built their lives on the assumption that I would always clean up behind them. They assumed my kindness was permanent. They assumed my support was automatic. I turned back toward Martin slowly. They need to understand what life actually looks like without me. His expression became cautious again. What are you planning? I walked back to the table and placed one finger on the townhouse deed. First, I want them out of my property. Martin inhaled sharply. Evelyn. They have lived there re-rent free for almost 10 years. I opened another folder. I paid the taxes, the maintenance, the insurance, the repairs, everything. I looked directly at him. And last night, my own son told me I was not good enough to attend a wedding I funded. Martin rubbed his jaw slowly. If we move legally, we can begin the eviction process immediately. Good. But understand something, he continued carefully. This will permanently damage your relationship with Daniel. I almost laughed again. What relationship? That shut the room completely silent, because we both knew the truth. The relationship had already died at the wedding entrance. We were simply discussing burial arrangements. I sat back down slowly. Second, I said calmly, the monthly transfers stop immediately. Martin frowned. What transfers? I opened my banking app and turned the screen toward him. Every month on the 1st, $3,500 to Daniel, $2,000 to Paula. Automatic transfers. Martin stared at the numbers in disbelief. You've been supporting them financially this entire time. I call it family help. I smiled bitterly. I call it funding my own humiliation. Without hesitation, I pressed cancel on both transfers. The screen flashed. Payments schedule removed. Done. Something strange happened at that moment. I expected guilt, sadness, fear. Instead, I felt lighter, like chains I didn't even realize I was carrying had finally fallen away. Martin watched me carefully. You've already made your decision. Yes. And there's no going back? I looked toward Thomas's old photograph hanging near the kitchen. No, I said quietly. There isn't. Martin slowly opened his briefcase again. All right then. He pulled out legal forms. If we're doing this, we do it properly. For the next 2 hours, we worked together carefully. Formal notices, property documentation, financial separation, asset protection. Every signature I wrote felt symbolic, not destruction. liberation. By noon, the paperwork was complete. Martin gathered everything into neat folders before standing to leave. At the door, he paused. Evelyn, yes, I've known you for almost 20 years. He smiled faintly. And I don't think your son understands what he just unleashed. After he left, I stood alone in my apartment for a long moment. The silence no longer felt lonely, it felt powerful. Across town, Daniel and Paula were probably still celebrating, Dr. inking expensive champagne, laughing with wealthy guests, believing they had successfully erased the embarrassing old woman from their perfect lives. What they didn't realize was this: the embarrassing old woman owned the foundation beneath their entire world. And foundations are dangerous things to lose, especially all at once. The next 15 days were strangely peaceful. Not happy, peaceful. There's a difference. Happiness is loud, temporary, fragile. Peace is quieter. It comes when you finally stop betraying yourself for people who would never do the same for you. While Daniel and Paula enjoyed their luxury honeymoon in Italy, believing their lives were still perfectly intact, I quietly dismantled the illusion they had built around themselves for years, piece by piece, without shouting, without revenge fantasies, without drama, just the truth. Martin handled the legal side carefully. Formal notices were drafted, property protections updated, bank accounts secured, ownership records reviewed. And every time Martin called with another update, it felt more awake, more like myself. The first major step came 3 days after the wedding. I was sitting in my living room drinking tea when Martin phoned. The townhouse locks have been changed, he said. Security access has been updated too. I closed my eyes briefly. That townhouse. I still remember the day I bought it. Daniel and Paula were newly married then. They couldn't qualify for the mortgage they wanted because Daniel's finances were unstable early in his career. So I bought the property outright under my name and told them they could live there while they got established. At the time, Daniel cried when I handed him the keys. Actually, I cried. Mom, he said back then, I swear I'll repay you someday. Funny how quickly gratitude disappears once people become comfortable. Evelyn, Martin asked gently. I'm here. Are you sure you want to continue? I looked around my apartment slowly, at Thomas's photograph, at the old sewing machine near the window, at the wedding folder still resting on the table like evidence from a crime scene. Then I remembered Daniel's face at the entrance, cold, impatient, embarrassed. Yes, I answered calmly. I'm sure. After ending the call, I stood and walked into my bedroom. For the first time in years, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out the old jewelry box Thomas bought me decades ago. Inside were small reminders of my real life, not the life Daniel created in country clubs and luxury restaurants. My life. Wedding photographs, Thomas's watch, old anniversary letters, business cards from our trucking company. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened one of Thomas's old letters carefully. Evelyn, it read, if anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel small, not even our own son. If Rose. I had forgotten that line. Or maybe I ignored it because I never imagined it would become necessary. Tears filled my eyes briefly, but this time they felt different. Not helpless, protective. Like Thomas was somehow still standing beside me, reminding me who I used to be before years of emotional neglect convinced me to shrink myself for my son's comfort. That afternoon, I did something unexpected. I went shopping. Not for groceries, not for gifts, not for anyone else. For me. I walked into an upscale salon downtown. I had passed hundreds of times, but never entered because I always thought it was too expensive. The young receptionist smiled warmly. Do you have an appointment? No, I admitted, but I'd like a transformation. She laughed softly. Well, you came to the right place. 3 hours later, I barely recognized myself. My silver curls had been styled delicately. My makeup was softer, my posture straighter somehow. When the stylist handed me the mirror, she smiled. You look powerful. Powerful. Nobody had used that word to describe me in years. On the drive home, I kept staring at my reflection in the taxi window. Not because I suddenly looked younger, I didn't, but I looked alive again. When I reached my apartment building, my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, nearly dropped her grocery bags. Evelyn Hart, she gasped. You look incredible. I laughed for the first time in days. Thank you. But then her expression shifted slightly. I heard about the wedding. Of course she had. Humiliation spreads faster than kindness. I braced myself for pity. Instead, Mrs. Patterson surprised me completely. What your son did was disgraceful. I blinked. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Half the guests have been talking about it all week. That stopped me cold. All week? She nodded grimly. People were horrified, especially after they found out you paid for most of the event. Interesting. Very interesting. Because suddenly I realized something Daniel and Paula probably hadn't expected. Public humiliation works both ways. Mrs. Patterson squeezed my arm gently. You didn't deserve that. For a moment, emotion caught in my throat again. Not because of the wedding, because someone finally said it aloud. I nodded quietly and headed upstairs. That night, while Daniel and Paula posted smiling honeymoon pictures online, pretending their lives were perfect, I sat in my apartment reviewing financial statements with complete calm. The irony almost made me laugh. My son spent years trying to distance himself from my world, yet his entire lifestyle depended on it. Around 11:30 p.m., my phone buzzed. Daniel. A photograph appeared in the message thread. Him and Paula standing beside a luxury hotel pool in Florence, both smiling. The caption read, Wish you could have been here, Mom. I stared at the message for several long seconds. Then I noticed something strange. No apology. Not one. Not I'm sorry. Not we handled things badly. Nothing. Just manipulation wrapped in politeness. They still thought this was temporary. Still thought I would calm down eventually. I still believed I would choose family harmony over self respect. They had no idea who they were dealing with anymore. Slowly, I typed my response. I was exactly where you wanted me to be. Then I turned my phone off completely. The following morning, Martin called again. The financial transfers are officially terminated. Good. And there's something else. His voices carried a hint of satisfaction now. What? Your son tried accessing one of the old investment accounts yesterday. I frowned. How? He still had partial authorization from years ago. But because you transferred everything into the protected trust last week, he couldn't touch a cent. I leaned back slowly in my chair. So Daniel was already checking the money, already nervous, already sensing something changing beneath his feet. Martin chuckled softly. I don't think they realize how serious this is yet. No, I said quietly. They still think I'm bluffing. Outside my apartment window, rain began falling softly across Charleston. I walked toward the glass and watched water slided down the buildings, while something cold and steady settled deeper inside me. For years, I believed love meant endless forgiveness. Now I understood something far more important. Love without boundaries becomes permission for abuse. And for the first time in my life, I was finally done giving permission. The call finally came 12 days after the wedding. I knew it would happen eventually. People like Daniel only stay calm while they still believe they're in control. The moment control slips away, panic replaces arrogance very quickly. It was raining that evening, a slow Charleston rain that painted the city in reflections and soft yellow streetlights. I had just finished dinner and was sitting beside the window reading when my phone lit up again. Daniel. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. His breathing sounded uneven immediately. Mom. Not my mother. Not Evelyn. Mom. Interesting how quickly people remember family titles when they need something. Yes? Silence. Then finally, we need to talk. I looked calmly out the rain-covered window. We already talked at the wedding. This is serious. So was humiliating your mother in front of 200 people. Another long silence. Then his voice cracked slightly. Please. That single word surprised me more than anything else. Because Daniel Parker never begged, not even as a child. I stayed quiet. Finally, he spoke again. I'm downstairs. I frowned slightly and stood from the chair. When I looked through the apartment window, I saw a black luxury car parked beside the curb below. Daniel sat inside alone. Rain slid across the windshield while streetlights reflected across the hood like fractured gold. For several seconds, I simply stared down at the car. Part of me wanted to send him away. Another part, the mother part, I needed to see his face. 10 minutes later, I stepped outside holding an umbrella. The rain was cold against my skin as I walked toward the car. Daniel immediately got out when he saw me approaching, and for the first time in years, my son looked small. Not physically, emotionally. His expensive coat was wrinkled. His eyes were exhausted. His carefully controlled confidence had cracks all through it now. Get in, he said quietly. I hesitated briefly before entering the passenger seat. The interior smelled like leather, rainwater, and stress. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Rain tapped softly against the roof, while the city moved around us in blurred reflections. Then Daniel finally exhaled heavily and rubbed both hands across his face. You really changed the locks. I stared forward calmly. Yes. I thought Martin was bluffing. No. He laughed bitterly under his breath. You actually did it. Still no apology. Still focused on the consequences instead of the cruelty that caused them. Typical. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. What did you expect? He gripped the steering wheel tightly. I don't know. You've never acted like this before. That sentence almost made me smile, because he still didn't understand. This wasn't a new version of me. This was the version of me that existed before years of emotional exhaustion trained me to stay quiet. You mean I've never defended myself before? I corrected calmly. Daniel looked away toward the rain-covered windshield. You're destroying this family. No, I said softly. I'm exposing it. The words hit him hard. I could see it immediately. For several seconds, only the rain spoke between us. Then suddenly, his voice lowered into something almost fragile. You embarrassed me. I turned slowly toward him. What? At the wedding. You don't understand what my life is like now. The people there, my clients, investors. I stared at him in disbelief. Even now, even after everything, still talking about images, still talking about status, still talking about himself. You humiliated your mother because wealthy strangers might judge you? His jaw tightened instantly. You wouldn't understand. And there it was again. That same sentence, the same arrogance, the same assumption that because I was older and lived simply, I couldn't possibly understand power or pressure or social status. I suddenly felt tired, not emotionally, spiritually tired. Tired of being underestimated by the child I sacrificed my life to raise. Quietly, I reached into my purse and wrote a folded document. Then I handed it to him. He frowned and unfolded it slowly. As she read, the color drained from his face. Warehouse ownership statements, rental agreements, monthly income summaries. His hands literally froze. What is this? My life, I answered calmly. He stared at the numbers again, then again. His breathing changed. You own all this? Yes. This can't be right. I almost laughed. For years, Daniel, you thought your poor old mother survived on sewing repairs and retirement checks. He looked genuinely shaken now. There's millions here. Yes. Silence. Heavy silence. Rain continued sliding slowly down the windshield while my son stared at papers, proving he never truly knew the woman who raised him. Finally, he whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" I looked at him carefully. Would it have changed how you treated me? That question destroyed him. I saw it happen in real time. His eyes dropped immediately. His shoulders lowered slightly. Because deep down, he knew the answer. Yes. Yes, it would have changed everything. Not because he suddenly would have respected me as a mother, because he would have respected me as money. That realization hit him like a punch. You thought I was embarrassing, I continued quietly. A poor old seamstress from Savannah. A woman who didn't belong beside wealthy people. Mom, no. You wanted polished elegance. You wanted country club families. You wanted clients to think you came from money. Tears suddenly filled his eyes, real tears. I worked so hard to escape that life. That sentence stunned me into silence. Escape? Escape us? Escape Thomas? Escape me? Escape the people who gave him everything? He continued speaking before I could respond. You don't know what it's like, the pressure, the judgment, the way people look at you when they realize you didn't grow up wealthy. I stared at my son while rain blurred the world outside around us. And suddenly, I understood something tragic. Daniel had spent his entire adult life ashamed. Ashamed of his roots, ashamed of simplicity, ashamed of the very people who loved him most. Money hadn't transformed him. Fear had. Fear of being seen as ordinary. Fear of being seen as the little boy from a mechanic's family. And in trying so desperately to escape his past, he became cruel. I spent my entire life trying to give you opportunities, I whispered. And somehow you turned those opportunities into shame. Daniel covered his face briefly. Then finally, after nearly 2 weeks, he said the words I had waited to hear. I'm sorry. Not defensive, not polished, not strategic. Broken, raw, real. The car fell silent again. I looked at my son sitting there crying quietly in the driver's seat while rain surrounded us like static. And for the first time since the wedding, I no longer saw the arrogant businessman. I saw the frightened little boy who lost himself trying to impress people who would never truly care about him. But understanding pain does not erase consequences, and love does not cancel accountability. After several minutes, Daniel finally looked at me again. What happens now? I stared out through the rain-streaked windshield at the city lights shimmering across wet pavement. Then I answered honestly. That depends on whether you want your mother back or just your lifestyle. After that conversation in the car, Daniel stopped calling for several days. No angry texts, no desperate voicemails, no legal threats, just silence. And strangely enough, that silence told me more than his words ever had. For the first time in years, my son was thinking, really thinking. Not reacting, not manipulating, not trying to protect his image. Thinking. Meanwhile, Charleston kept moving around me like life always does. Rainstorms came and passed. Tourists filled the old downtown streets. Neighbors walked their dogs beneath the oak trees. And slowly, something unexpected began happening inside me. I started feeling lighter, not because the pain disappeared. It hadn't. There were still moments when I stayed alone in my apartment and remembered Clara as a little girl, and my chest tightened so sharply I had to close my eyes. But alongside the grief, another feeling had started growing. Freedom. The freedom of no longer begging for respect from people determined to withhold it. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the wedding, I was returning home from the market carrying grocery bags when I noticed someone sitting near the front steps of my apartment building. At first, I didn't recognize her. The girl looked smaller somehow, fragile. Then she stood up slowly. Grandma, Clara. For a moment, my heart stopped. She looked exhausted, not physically exhausted, emotionally. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her makeup was gone. And for the first time in years, she wasn't dressed like the polished daughter of wealthy parents. She looked young again, human again. I stood there silently while rain clouds drifted slowly above the city. Then I finally spoke. "What are you doing here?" Her lips trembled immediately. "I need to talk to you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to protect myself, to send her away before she could reopen wounds I was barely learning to survive. But another part of me remembered bedtime stories, piano recitals, tiny hands wrapped around my neck when she was little. So I unlocked the apartment door quietly and stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment felt strangely tense once she entered. Clara stood near the kitchen awkwardly, like she no longer knew whether she belonged there. That realization hurt more than I expected. I set the groceries down slowly. "Tea?" She nodded silently. While the kettle heated on the stove, neither of us spoke. Finally, Clara whispered, "They're falling apart." I didn't task who. I already knew. "My parents barely speak now," she continued quietly. "Dad sleeps in the guest room. Mom cries constantly. They blame each other for everything." I poured hot water carefully into 2 cups. "And what about you?" That question broke her immediately. Tears flooded her eyes. "I don't even know anymore." She covered her face briefly, trying to control herself. "Michael left." I froze. "Your husband?" C nodded. "He moved out 3 days ago." I slowly sat across from her at the kitchen table. "What happened?" Clara laughed bitterly through tears. "The same thing that happened to our entire family." Her voice cracked badly. "The money disappeared." Silence filled the apartment. Then she continued softly. "When Dad lost access to the accounts and people started talking about the wedding, everything changed." She wiped her face shakily. "Michael started acting differently. Cold. Distant." I stayed quiet. "He finally admitted he thought our family was wealthy. He thought my parents owned the townhouse. He thought we had investments. He thought—" She swallowed hard. "He thought marrying me meant security." The words landed heavily between us. For a long moment, I simply stared at my granddaughter. Then quietly, I asked, And did you love him? She started crying again immediately. Yes, real heartbreak, real shame, not social embarrassment, human pain. And suddenly I understood something tragic. Clara was finally experiencing the same lesson I learned at the wedding entrance: conditional love. Love is attached to comfort, status, money, appearance, not real love. I handed her a napkin gently. When did he leave? The morning after Dad told him the townhouse wasn't ours. She laughed bitterly again. He said he didn't sign up to struggle financially. God, the cruelty of that sentence nearly took my breath away because it sounded exactly like something Paul would say. Generational poison, passed downward like inheritance. Clara stared into her tea quietly, then finally whispered, I think I became like them. I didn't answer immediately, because honesty matters more than comfort sometimes. Yes, I said softly, you did. She closed her eyes painfully. I know. For several seconds, only the ticking kitchen clock filled the room. Then Clara looked at me again. Grandma, why didn't you fight back sooner? That question surprised me. I thought carefully before answering. Because women from my generation were taught endurance before self respect. She frowned slightly. What does that mean? I leaned back slowly in my chair. It means we were taught that keeping the peace mattered more than protecting ourselves. That sacrifice was love. That silence was dignity. I smiled sadly. So we stayed quiet while people slowly erased us. Claire stared at me sullenly. Then I continued. But eventually something changes. You wake up one day and realize surviving quietly is not the same thing as living. Tears slid slowly down her face again. I should have stopped them at the wedding. Yes, I answered honestly. You should have. She nodded immediately. No excuses. No blaming mom and dad. I saw what was happening, and I stayed silent because I was scared. That honesty mattered a lot. For the first time since she walked into my apartment, I saw accountability instead of avoidance. And accountability changes people. I reached across the table slowly and placed my hand over hers. Fear makes cowards out of good people sometimes. But staying a coward is a choice. She squeezed my hand tightly. I don't want to be like them anymore. I studied her face carefully. Then finally, for the first time since the wedding, he saw hope. Not because the damage disappeared, it hadn't, but because maybe the cycle could stop here. Maybe pain did not have to become an inheritance. Clara looked around the apartment quietly. I used to love this place when I was little. I smiled faintly. You used to build blanket forts in the living room. A small laugh escaped her through tears. And Grandpa always pretended he couldn't find me. The mention of Tommaso softened the room instantly. For several minutes, we simply sat together remembering him. And for the first time in weeks, the apartment no longer felt haunted by betrayal. It felt human again. Finally, Clara looked at me nervously. Grandma, yes? I don't really have anywhere to go. A vulnerability in her voice nearly broke my heart. I looked toward the hallway quietly, then back at her. The guest room still has clean sheets. Her face crumpled immediately. Are you serious? Yes. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. I don't deserve that kindness. No, I admitted gently. Maybe not yet. She lowered her eyes in shame. Then I continued softly. But healing has to start somewhere. And as my granddaughter cried quietly at my kitchen table while evening sunlight faded across the apartment walls, I realized something important. What I wanted was never revenge. Not really. What I wanted was dignity. And sometimes the most powerful thing a wounded person can do, it refused to become cruel after surviving cruelty. The final confrontation happened on a Thursday evening, exactly 30 days after the wedding. 30 days since my son looked me in the eyes and told me I was not on the guest list. Funny how quickly life changes in a month. The weather had finally turned cooler in Charleston. Soft wind drifted through the open kitchen window, while Clara prepared dinner quietly beside me. Over the past few weeks, the apartment had started feeling alive again. Not luxurious, not modern, not impressive by country club standards, but warm, peaceful, real. Clara had changed too. The spoiled bride who once measured happiness through appearances slowly disappeared day by day. She started working remotely for a small design company, paid her own phone bill for the first time, stopped wearing expensive labels. I started laughing more naturally. Pain had stripped away the performance, and underneath it, I finally saw the granddaughter I remembered loving. That evening, we were setting the table when the doorbell rang. Clara froze instantly. We both knew who it was. Slowly, I walked toward the door and opened it. Daniel stood there alone. For a moment, I barely recognized him. The transformation shocked me. His expensive confidence was gone, the polished arrogance, the carefully controlled superiority, all gone. My son looked exhausted, not physically, spiritually. His eyes carried the hollow look of someone who finally understood the difference between appearing successful and actually having a life worth living. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he looked past me slightly and noticed Clara standing quietly near the kitchen. His expression shifted painfully. "You're here," he whispered to her. Clara crossed her arms tightly. "Yes." The silence between them felt heavy enough to break furniture. Finally, Daniel looked back at me. "Can I come in?" A month earlier, I probably would have stepped aside immediately. A month earlier, guilt would have controlled me. But now I understand something important. Access to my life was no longer automatic. Respect came first. "What do you want, Daniel?" He swallowed hard. "I need to talk to both of you." I studied him carefully, then finally stepped aside. 5 minutes. He entered slowly, like a man walking into a church after years of avoiding God. The apartment seemed smaller around him now. Not because it changed, because he finally saw it honestly. His eyes moved across the old furniture, the family photographs, Thomas's picture near the hallway. And suddenly, I realized something heartbreaking. My son had spent so many years chasing wealth and status that he forgot this apartment once felt like home. Daniel sat at the kitchen table carefully. Clara remained standing. Neither of them knew how to begin. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Paula left." Clara looked down immediately. I stayed silent. "She moved to Miami with a friend. She said she couldn't live like this anymore. Like this. Meaning normal. Meaning consequences. Meaning reality." Daniel laughed bitterly under his breath. "You know the worst part?" Nobody answered. "She still blames you." His eyes met mine. "She says you destroyed our lives." I leaned back slowly in my chair. "No," I said calmly. "I exposed them." The truth hung quietly in the room. Daniel nodded slowly. "I know." That surprised me. Not the words, honesty. For the first time in years, my son was speaking without performing. No manipulation, no excuses, no polished corporate language, just the truth. He rubbed his hands together nervously before continuing. "I lost clients after the wedding." Clara looked up sharply. "What?" Daniel smiled bitterly. "Turns out wealthy people don't trust men will publicly humiliate their own mothers." Silence. Somebody recorded part of what happened outside the venue. It spread around, not online publicly, but privately. Business circles, country clubs. People talk. Of course they did. People who worship status become terrified when cruelty stains their image. Daniel continued quietly. One client literally told me, "If that's how you treat your mother, I can't imagine how you treat business partners." The irony almost felt poetic. He spent years protecting his image, only to destroy it himself. Daniel looked down at the kitchen table. I thought success meant becoming someone important. His voice cracked slightly. But somewhere along the way, I became someone ugly. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Clara quietly sat down across from him. And suddenly, for the first time since the wedding, they looked like family again. Not polished, not glamorous, broken humans. Daniel finally looked at me directly. I hated where we came from. The honesty of that sentence stunned the room into silence. I hated feeling poor growing up. I hated watching you work all the time. I hated seeing Dad come home exhausted every night. Tears filled his eyes. So when I finally entered that world, the wealthy world, I became obsessed with never looking poor again. He laughed weakly through tears, and somehow I convinced myself that meant erasing the people who sacrificed everything for me. I stared at my son quietly. Then I asked the question that mattered most. When did you stop seeing me as your mother? That broke him completely. Daniel lowered his head and cried openly for the first time since Thomas's funeral 23 years earlier. I don't know, he whispered. I really don't know. The apartment filled with soft silence again. Not angry silence, grieving silence. The kind people sit inside when truth finally arrives and there's nowhere left to hide from it. Clara reached across the table slowly and touched her father's hand. I became like you, she whispered tearfully. Daniel closed his eyes painfully. I know. Then he looked at me again. I don't expect forgiveness. Good. Because real accountability does not demand immediate comfort. He continued softly. But I needed you to know something. I waited quietly. The worst thing that happened after the wedding wasn't losing the townhouse, or the money, or Paula leaving. His voice trembled. It was realizing I turned into someone Dad would have been ashamed of. That sentence hit me harder than anything else that night, because for the first time, my son finally understood. Not financially, morally. He understood the real loss. I looked toward Thomas's photograph hanging near the hallway, then back at Daniel. Your father wasn't ashamed of being poor, I said softly. He was ashamed of cruelty. Daniel nodded silently while tears rolled down his face. For a long time, nobody moved. Then finally, I stood from the table and walked toward the kitchen window. Outside, Charleston glowed quietly beneath evening lights, while soft wind moved through the trees. I thought about the wedding entrance, the humiliation, the rage, the loneliness, and strangely enough, I no longer felt broken by it, because that terrible moment had forced me to finally reclaim myself. Slowly, I turned back toward them. I spent years believing love meant endless sacrifice, I said quietly. But love without dignity destroys people. Clara wiped her eyes carefully. Daniel remained silent. I continued. What happened at that wedding nearly destroyed this family. But the truth is, this family was already broken long before that night. Nobody argued, because they knew I was right. I walked back to the table slowly. Then I looked directly at my son. You can't undo what happened. I know. But if you want redemption, real redemption, Then stop chasing appearances and start becoming someone worthy of respect. Daniel nodded immediately, not defensively, not arrogantly, humbly. And in that moment, I realized something important. Pain changes people, sometimes for the worse, sometimes for the better, and sometimes, if they are brave enough to face themselves honestly, pain finally turns them back into human beings. That night, Daniel stayed for dinner. Not because everything was magically healed. It wasn't. Some wounds leave scars forever. But for the first time in years, we sat together without pretending. No luxury masks, no social performance, no fake perfection. Just three imperfect people learning how to rebuild something honest from the ruins of pride. Later that night, after Daniel left, Clara stood beside me near the window, watching the city lights quietly. Grandma? Yes? Do you regret what you did? I thought about that carefully. Then I smiled softly. No. She looked surprised. Not even a little? I shook my head gently. The night your father blocked me at that wedding entrance, I thought my life was ending. I looked out toward the glowing city quietly. But it wasn't the end. I smiled again. It was the first day I finally chose myself. And as the wind moved softly through Charleston that night, carrying away years of silence, shame, and sacrifice, I realized something beautiful. They didn't throw me out of my life at that wedding. They accidentally gave it back to me. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Stories like these remind us that dignity matters at every age and that sometimes the hardest lesson in life is learning when to stop sacrificing yourself for people who only love you when you're useful. And now I want to hear from you. If your own child humiliated you publicly after everything you sacrificed for them, would you walk away quietly? Or would you finally choose yourself? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoy emotional stories about family, betrayal, strength, awakening, and second chances, stay with us. Because the next story might feel even closer to home.